Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rishoketsu Tati, otherwise known as Shoki, and I will be your host for the Studio UG webinar. And I guess the question for today is, have you seen Studio UG? And if you haven't, I will be showing you Studio UG. And if you have, I'll show you some tricks that can make your life a little bit easier in Studio UG. In today's webinar, I'll start by obviously giving you an introduction into Studio UG. Then we look at creating mind designs, focusing on our input string file data into our block models and visualizing them in Studio UG. Then we basically take those strings and we look at how to convert them to solids and evaluate against the block model, followed by us determining a logical sequence of mining layout. And then we export to EPS, where we define when and how much to mine. Then I will update the design and schedule after making those changes and show you how easy it is to do it in Studio UG. And right at the end, we will be taking the questions. Now, some Studio UG highlights. Some of the stuff we're excited about is we've got, overall improvements related to the background performance of the package. Processes are definitely much faster, and you can see some of those processes on the diagram on the slide. We've got MSO version 3.5, which is now included in Studio UG and does not require a separate license. You've got new functionalities such as attribute-based linking, new method for outline segmentation, and another one that our clients are excited about is that it now allows you to run concurrent sessions, which means that you're able to open more than one project. And those are just some of the highlights which I think have made life a little bit easier compared to 5D Planner. Now this slide just shows you a comparison on the workflow between Studio UG and 5D Planner. And I mean, there has been some improvement in the process flow in that you've now removed the repetitive tasks, which speeds up the planning process. And you can see just from the Studio UG workflow that it's much simpler. And I'll also show you throughout the webinar that it's a bit more intuitive when you compare it to 5D Planner. And of course, the big one for us here would be processing at a go, which I think a lot of us are excited about. The Studio UG workflow, you basically access the planning task table, and this contains the underground planning functions. Now, these tools will help you progress from your strings. So you set up all your input data, your strings, your block model, all your interrogation information. From there, you take those strings and you apply attributes to those strings. Then the next step is design definitions, which will enable you to set up some parameters to convert those strings into solids. And then the mining layout, which is your dependencies, where you set up your rules, and then ultimately you will export to EPS. So this webinar basically will follow this workflow, the Studio UG workflow. And hopefully at the end of the webinar, you will be as excited as UG as I am. To take you through the Studio UG workflow, I will be using our benching project for the webinar. Now, in order for us to create our designs, I'll start with the user interface that you can already see. Key highlights here are the ribbons on top, which groups the tools based on their functionalities. And you can see they appear when the user needs them to appear. This is a little bit easier to work with than having all the tools displayed in front of you. The other thing for you to notice is that we no longer have the 2D design window. And that's because In Studio UG, all the design work can take place in your 3D window. However, for all our 5D planner customers who aren't quite ready to let go of the 2D design window, there still is a way you can switch it back on in Studio UG. I will now load the data that I will be using for the webinar. I'll start with the strings file. So I will drag and drop the files into my 3D window. So these are the strings files which we will then be converting into solids. To create these strings file, you either use the toolbars in your ribbons or else you use shortcut keys which are the same in Studio UG as they are in 5D Planner. Now to just take you through the layout quickly, you've got your decline there in green, and then you've got your level accesses in purple. Your level accesses then intersect the ore body, from which then you will have the ore drives. Just to show you in plan view, you've got your decline access, level access, services infrastructure, sump, your ventilation infrastructure, and you've got your ore drives, your stockpiles in orange there. Just to take you across the different levels to show you the infrastructure, you can see the infrastructure is the same. Okay, so I'm gonna bring back all my designs. As I said, the shortcut keys that you use in 5D Planner, you will also be able to use in Studio UG as well as across all the Studio series. I will now load in our Stopes wireframes. These stopes were created in MSO. In order to create these stopes in MSO, you would need a block model. You can also use the ore body wireframe to define the optimal stope shapes. I will also load in the block model. You see it there as an intersection. I will change it so you can see it as blocks. Switch off my stope so you can see it properly. Now you're able to create an external 3D window, which you can also rotate and visualize as desired. And you can also split your 3D view. I'll split it vertically. And again, you are able to rotate the different views independently. And you can also do the same horizontally. So this is just ways in which you can use to visualize your data a bit better. Okay, so now we will move towards converting our strings into wireframes and evaluating our design. To begin the processing, I'm going to unload all the files that I have loaded in my project. I will access the planning ribbon and click on show to activate all my planning ribbon functionalities. I'll start with the project setup and start with the design files. Studio UG, the same as in 5D Planner, has 4 different design types. You have your fixed cross-sectional, which is a string that you apply a cross-sectional area to in order to form a solid. You've got an outline, which is a flow string that you project either up or down to form a solid. You've got a complex solid, which is two or more strings that combine to form one wireframe. And you've got an imported wireframe that we are importing from MSO. Now, what you need to notice here is that I've got 4 different files set up for my fixed cost sectionals. Now, this is a big improvement, which means that different people can work on different areas of mine, and the entire design does not have to be ready at the same time for you to start processing. Another key takeaway is the group identifier for the wireframes and for the complex solids. Because instead of having to group the strings for the complex solids or the angles for the wireframe by a combination of color, line style, and symbol, all you need to do now is choose a group identifier, which will then group all the triangles for the wireframes to form one solid, and which will group all the strings for the complex solid to form one wireframe. Then next are my naming conventions, and you can see in my project I've got different naming conventions set up for different areas of the mine using filters. Now, to show you the conventions that I have set up, I've got 3 that I've set up. And these naming conventions will be applied to the different areas of the mine using filters. Again, you can see how you can quickly access whatever you want to access in Studio UG. I don't have to close anything and go back somewhere else to set it up. You set it up as you go along. The last part of my project setup are my interrogation settings. You first start by setting as many block models as you want to use for your evaluation. Again, you've got the ability to quickly set up your filters if you want different block models to evaluate different areas of your mine. Your properties, where you select which properties from the block model you want to evaluate. And then you can see I've set up my interrogation rules in such a way that I will begin by evaluating my ore development. After it's done evaluating my ore development, it will deplete the ore development. And then the last step would be evaluating my wireframes, which are my strokes. And of course, this has been set up to avoid double accounting, because in this case of our design, we've got ore development running into the stroke. So you don't want to double account for those tons. Very important as well, you've got your evaluation legend, which will be exported as material categories in ETS. And that is your project setup. Something else I didn't mention, you will see in all these steps, you've got the option to import and export the settings as you wish. Now, when you create a project, in the folder where the project is created, there is the UG database folder that stores all the settings and all your output data for your project. Now, this is where it allows you to import all the settings from, which makes it easy because, again, you don't have to close anything and go somewhere else. You can do it as you go along. Now, the next step in my Studio UG workflow is the design panel. Now, I'm going to start by loading in my design from the design panel. You don't have to go to your project settings and load the files one by one. And already you can see all the attributes that have been set up in your project. Now, to show you, I'm going to choose 2. I'll choose level. It shows you in this table all the current values that have been set up in your project. The major improvement here is if you want to see your attributes, you are able to use the functionality to show the labels. So once you show the labels, it shows you what attributes you've assigned to that wireframe or to that string. I'm going to change the attribute. So let's look at region. Another big improvement when it comes to our attributes assignment is you are now able to manually select your wireframes. This is definitely a bit more user-friendly than in Studio 5D Planner. Let me change my labels as well so you can see. And if you want to assign the attributes for a bulk of the wireframes, I'm going to select, I'm going to select them like this. And then it highlights all the wireframes that you want to apply the attributes. Just to show you how it works, I'm going to change these. I'm going to assign a new value of west to these stopes that I have selected. And then you can see it changes all those wireframes that you've selected. It changes the attribute to west. Very simple, very easy, very user-friendly. Now I'm going to change them back to east. The other thing here is the design direction. Although it's not new from 5D Planner, it is new in this version 2.4 of Studio UG. And what that does is, so I'm going to switch off my stopes. It basically just shows you the direction for your fixed cross sectionals. The last thing in the design panel is the automated design. Now, unfortunately for this design, we do not have any rules set up to show you this functionality. What we have planned is following this webinar, we will have a series of videos to showcase all the functionalities in Studio UG that were not covered in this webinar using this project. So in the next few weeks, you should be able to see those videos. And that's all in the design panel. I'm going to unload my design. Now the next step in the planning workflow is the definitions panel. Again, I'm going to start by loading my data from the definitions panel. Now, the important thing to take note of here is this match by functionality. Studio UG allows you to match your design definition based on an attribute in that file. In this case, I've matched my strings by color. And you can match your strings by any attribute which has been set up in your project. For the imported wireframes, remember we use the stope identifier which identifies each unique stope. Now to show you the design definitions in detail, again you can see that my design definitions have been matched by color. You've got the name of the design definition, the description, which gives us the full name, the shape, which works quite similar in 5D Planner. You are able to set up as many shapes as you wish for your project. The segmenting is quite easier because it gives you either the option to segment by length or to segment by number. And then you've got your default values. You're able now to give each design definition a unique default value, and you can access it directly from this window. You don't have to go back to project settings and set this up again. So you can set up as many groups of default values as you wish. And then you've got some information here that will be exported to EPS. So this is your default constraint and your rates, which you can set up here, which will appear in EPS. These two icons here you've seen before. They allow you to import settings or they allow you to export as you wish. You've got this generate button, which basically allows you to select which file you want the information to read from. And then you've got that functionality to match your attributes. In this case, we've matched it by color. I'm going to go to my wireframes just to show you. All the stopes in my file have the same color, so you only have one design definition for our stopes. And from the 3D window, you are still able to change your design definition. So in the event that you have set up the wrong design definition, you can select a string, you can select the correct design definition, and you can apply it from here. It works quite the same way as it did in 5D Planner. Alright, so that's it for the design definition. I'm going to unload my data and I will move to the next step in our planning workflow, which is the data validation. My data validation will check for errors in the strings that may lead to the irregular formation of solids, which may lead to incorrect results. Now, the nice thing about the validation panel is that you've got quick access to all the settings that will be used for your data evaluation, and you're able to change them as you please. Now, the procedure is quite simple. After you've checked all your validation options, you simply click on Go, and the processing will begin. Alright, so once the process has been complete, it will tell you all the errors that exist in your design here at the bottom, and you will be able to zoom in on each error and make the changes that are required for your design. In this case, I have no design validation errors, so I will continue with the next step of my Studio UG, which is to process. Now, in my process panel, I have quick access to firstly my design definition, which is sort of a last minute check to check your setup before you start processing. You've got your derived activities. Your derived activities were quite similar the way they did in 5D Planner. I created a derived activity for backfill from my parent filter, which is my wireframes, my slopes, because you cannot have two activities having the points in Studio UG. I will translate the point for my backfill by 1. And I've created a backfill volume for to report the backfill. So it works quite similar to 5D Planner. Okay, so I mean, the one big thing that you can see here is that there's only one button to process everything. If you remember at the beginning of my presentation when I showed you the workflow for Studio UG, this is what simplifies the workflow for UG, because instead of having various steps like we did in 5D Planner to process the walls and points, to process the wireframes, to process the derived activities, interrogate our design. In Studio UG, you simply click one button and all those processes take place at the same time without you having to stay on your PC to start the next process. Now, for this project, I've already processed all my data. So I'm going to show you where all the data is stored once you're done processing. As I mentioned before, in the project where your in the folder where your project is created, you've got a UG database folder that I'm going to open. There's two sets of folders. You've got your data and you've got your settings. Your settings will obviously store all the settings for your project, and your data is where all your output data is stored. I will load my solids that I've created into my 3D window. I'm going to switch off all my points so you can see the wireframes properly. So you can see now the strings have been converted to solids. And in terms of your evaluation results, you have the functionality to show that table. And this table shows you all my evaluation results for the project. Again, you've got the functionality to export the table to CSV. And that's it for processing all our data. The next part of the planning workflow is sequencing, determining a logical sequence for your mining layout, which are your dependencies in Studio UG. I'm going to start by loading my data. While my data is loading, we've been conducting some tests to see how long the data takes to load in the dependencies panel compared to 5D Planner. And we're finding that it is taking much quicker in Studio UG compared to 5D Planner, because it did take a bit of time in 5D Planner. Okay, so my data is loaded. What I'm going to start by doing is making my wireframes transparent so that we can see through them. I'm going to switch off my internal layer. I have two sets of dependencies created using two layers. The pink layer was used to create the dependencies for my development, and the purple layer was used to create the links for my scopes. Basically, you create a dependency between two segments. The direction of the dependency determines which one is the predecessor, so which segment comes before, and then the successor, which segment comes after. And this is what creates the sequence of your mining layout. Now, these dependencies are created either by using rules, and you can also create them manually. But of course, you would like to create the bulk of the dependencies with rules so that you can reduce the time that you need for the manual links. I'm going to start by opening my rules that have been set up for this project. All right, so the key highlights here are your attribute-based rules, which basically allows you to create links using attributes that have been set up in that project. This is a big improvement in Studio UG. This is one of the videos we'll be showcasing that will follow after the webinar, so we can show you how you can use this functionality properly. You've got your spatial-based rules that work quite similar to 5G Planner. However, for me here, I find that the search radius are much more user-friendly to use compared to the previous setup we had in 5D Planner. Okay, so I'm going to close my rules. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is I'll show you how you would create links manually in Studio UG. I'm going to zoom in on this part of my design. Okay, so I want to create a link between my decline access and my access. So I go to the manual dependency editing tab. You've got two options. You either choose to draw discrete, or if you want if you wanted to do a continuous link, you would then choose draw continuous. I'm going to change my layer to development, and I'm going to choose draw discrete. Now, the key highlight here is I'm able to select the actual wireframe when I create my dependencies. Now, this is a big improvement because you don't now have to zoom into the points in order to create the dependencies, because you find sometimes that the points are very close to one another and you end up creating the link using the wrong point. So this is definitely a major improvement in Studio UG. Okay, so that's it for my dependencies. The last thing is you're now able to sequence using the sequence tab. So to play your animation, I'm just gonna show you quickly. And that's it for my dependencies. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to unload my data. So the next step in our UG workflow is EPS. So this is where we determine how much and when we will be mining. To transfer data to EPS, we have two options. We can either create a new schedule or we can update an existing schedule. Now, this is extremely useful because it only exports the changes that you've made to an already existing schedule. I want to start by loading my solids into my 3D window, and then I'm going to load my schedule. Now, I don't have as much time to go through EPS in detail, so I'm just going to go through the interface quickly. We have the task table, which lists all the tasks in the project. These are basically all the segments that have been created in Studio UG. The key highlight here is the way that the ID is reported now. It's different from how it was reported in 5D Planner. And this just basically makes the processing quicker. And then you've got your Gantt charts, which is a graphical representation of your task table. You've got your cross tab at the bottom, which is for reporting purposes. Then you've got your resource bar chart, which lists all the resources that have been applied to your project. Now, my resources have already been applied for my tasks, and my schedule has been leveled to smooth it. I've created a dashboard. This is quite helpful because it gives you a snapshot of your results without you having to export your results to EPS. Okay, so now that I've taken you through the entire workflow from Studio UG, from your project settings right through to EPS, what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be making some changes to our design, and I'm basically going to show you how you would then update your project. So I'm going to close my schedule, and I'm going to go back to the beginning where I started my workflow. I'm going to change the ventilation file that's been set up in my project to another one that has some slight changes. I did keep the colors the same so that I don't have to change my design definitions or set them up again. I'm going to save, and I'll jump straight to processing. And you'll see once I start processing, it will show you the exact file that it is reprocessing. And there you can see your new ventilation file that I chose. While the process is still running, please send us messages. You can send us messages straight here on GoWebinar if you have any questions that you'd like us to answer. If we don't get time to answer all your questions, then we can always contact you directly after the webinar. What I'll do is at the end of the webinar, I'll also leave a slide with all our contact details so that if you want us to show you something specific, or if you've got a specific question, then you can contact us directly. So the processing has now been completed. It took 2 minutes and 8 seconds. I'm going to scroll up. Key highlights here is that it only processed the changes, the vent changes that I made to my FXS file. And you can see that no wireframe processing was required because there were no changes to that file. Now, because I made changes to my design, I'm going to have quickly reprocess my rules. Completed. Then the next thing would then be export to EPS. As I mentioned previously, we have two transfer options in EPS. One is to create a new schedule and the other is to update an existing schedule, which is what we're going to be doing. I'm going to start by transferring all my data. Okay, EPS transfer successful. Now I will load my schedule. As you can see, my profile for my horizontal development is not as smooth as it was before, and that's because if we look at the schedule, all the segments that I reprocess no longer have resources applied to them because they've been reprocessed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to filter out all those tasks that no longer have resources applied to them, and I will apply resources. Then I will level my schedule. And then you can see my profile is smooth again. Now this brings me to the end of the webinar. Thank you very much.